All right, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, or welcome back, depending on which video you might have watched first. But this video is going to cover conditional statements, maybe give you guys a little heads up or some insights on how to do that while also providing some notes. So please note that this videos might be a little bit longer. I'm trying something new, and again, if you didn't watch the notation video, you might get a sense. You might not know what I'm talking about. But to get a sense of it, I'm going to try to incorporate some of the homework I gave you into your notes. Because since I'm not collecting homework for points, like this is where it should end up. And instead of kind of being indirect about it, I'm trying to be very direct about it. Like your homework should end up in your notes at some point when you feel good about it being correct. So this could totally be confirmation for that. All right. So another reminder, especially at the beginning of this process, that if you feel I'm going too fast in the video, please keep in mind it's a video, so you can totally back up, pause it, and hold it still as long as possible as you need to get down what you need or maybe think about stuff. Okay. So let's talk about conditional statements. Let's talk about what are the components of conditional statements because that's the most important part. So a conditional statement is nothing more than a dependent declaration. So that's all it is, if-then statement. So if I just make up a if-then statement, a conditional statement off the top of my head, because it is Saturday morning, how about something like this? If Mizzou, oops, that's messy. Let's try that again. So let's say if Mizzou scores 30 points, they will win the game. Okay? Now, I'm not saying this statement is true. That's not really where we are right now in terms of our study of conditional statements. We're just trying to get a sense of what the pieces actually mean. So we do have two very distinct parts. We have what's called the hypothesis, and hopefully this is a review from class. If not, get it down now because you're going to need it. So we have this first part, if Mizzou scores 30 points, and then we have this kind of follow-up part, they will win the game. And I forgot something here. Let me fix that. Whoop. Hope you guys were freaking out there because I forgot my then. It didn't feel right when I was saying it, and that was the reason why. Okay, so if Mizzou scores 30 points, then they will win the game. The two parts we're dealing with here is what we call the hypothesis. And then we have this part at the end, which is called the conclusion. Now, memorize those names isn't really important, but what is important, as Mizzou just literally scored another touchdown, up to 13 points, so it's becoming closer to the truth. What's important to know about the hypothesis and the conclusion is that the hypothesis has to have happened for us to even consider the conclusion, which is why in class I was saying the hypothesis is an assumption assumed to be true. I'm not saying that you have to believe it's true. What I'm saying is you have to go work under the assumption that it's actually happening. Because if Mizzou doesn't score 30 points, debating whether or not they're going to win the game isn't applicable to this particular sentence. And again, I know this is difficult because you got to let go like all the other stuff you know about football, about Mizzou, about points, and how like all those actually work together. But when you're evaluating statements for truth, for false, for untruth, or for like being false, or trying to examine kind of logic, you have to let go of all those other things. You have to only look at what's in front of you. So we have to assume Mizzou scoring 30 points, and if they do, then we can debate whether or not they're going to win the game. Okay, then the part about them winning the game, that's when you can bring in like the other parts. We can bring in like what we know about football and averages and how many points Central Florida can score. Like that's the part, but it's only when we're debating the conclusion. So this is the debatable part. Okay, an analogy I can give you is if like Mizzou scores 5 points and that's it, then debating whether or not they'll win the game at that point is independent of what they've scored. So it's not something we have to really think about anymore. If I said like, if I in anger kick my TV, then I'll be really sad. Well, if I never have kicked my TV in the first place, and debating whether that caused my sadness is inconsequential. Okay, and that'll come up later, later as we go. So that's the components of a conditional statement: the hypothesis and conclusion. We can make a few other quick notes here because there are some shorthand here. So I can also kind of call this if P, oops, ooh, got worse. If P then Q, which highlights that the if-then structure is a really important one, which you totally should know by now based on our last project. And if we want to get really wacky, if P, then Q. Now, I didn't talk about this much in class, but the fact that the symbol is one way implies that the conditional statement is a one-way statement, meaning we can't assume it's true both ways. So up here, like when Mizzou scores 30 points, then they'll win the game. Like if we assume that is true, we cannot assume that if they win the game, then they'll score 30 points. In fact, as soon as they said that sentence, you kind of realize is not necessarily true. So statements in the conditional form are typically one way. In terms of the forms of conditional statements, again, you should have these ready notes, but I'll run through them really quick just in case you don't. There are actually 4 different forms that we'll talk about this year. Three of them right now. We have something called the converse. There's something called the inverse, and then something called the contrapositive. Okay, so converse, the best way to think about a converse is just a switch. An inverse is a negation, and a contrapositive is a switch and a negation. Okay, so here's how that kind of plays out. So if I have this idea that if Mizzou scores 30 points, then they'll win the game. So we have if P, then Q. The converse is exactly switch. If Q, then P. The inverse is a negation. So if I had if Mizzou scores 30 points, then they'll win the game. It's going to be if Mizzou doesn't score 30 points, then they won't win the game. So we call that not P implies not Q. And that's what those little kind of weird looking sevens mean. Those mean not. And that's a nice thing to put in notes too. So let's go whoop, whoop. Okay, and then contrapositive is a combination of both. So this will be Q going first, and then that implies the P part, but we also are going to negate them along the way. So I'm going to make up another example to make this a bit easier. So the one outcome I'm going to work today will be if x plus 1 equals 3, then x equals 2. Because math examples, I think, a little bit faster to write, and we're going for speed here because we got some stuff on the bottom end we got to do. So if x plus 1 equals 3, then x equals 2. So in terms of switching it, the converse would be if x equals 2, then x plus 1 equals 3. So again, we're just switching the two parts, hypothesis and conclusion. They take a switch for the converse statement. For the inverse, we're negating them. So instead of x plus 1 equaling 3, we can say x plus 1 does not equal 3, which is what that little symbol means. Then x cannot equal 2. So the order is the same as the original, but the statement itself is negated. Contrapositive is a combination of both, so I'm switching them. So the x equals 2 part is coming first, but it is negated, so if x does not equal 2, then x plus 1 does not equal 3. Now, if you notice, all those statements actually turn out to be true, which is interesting. So the original conditional statement was true, so are all the variants. So we can totally say the statement is true no matter what because we've examined it from all angles, which is ultimately why we're actually studying these conditional statements anyway. So if you're trying to attach the meaning to the idea of conditional statement or statements or why we're doing them, it really gives us an advanced form of argumentation. So if you can imagine, say, like debating someone or debating someone's idea, and they say something like they give you a statement that is most likely going to be conditional. So like something like, well, if we don't change how we make cars, then we're going to destroy our environment. Well, if they give you that statement and you can fire back at them all three of these variants and force them to actually answer all the variations, you can start picking apart like very definite areas in the argument that are no good, that are going to be kind of falling short. If you fire back all three of these and they have answers and they can show you why those statements are true regardless, then you probably have a pretty solid argument. And that gives you a very kind of light look at like why we study these conditional statements. I'm trying to make you guys really good at arguments and like so you guys can win them all, which is totally going to appeal to some of you guys. So we had this problem, and I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm maybe just going to go through maybe one of them just for the sake of time, but then I'll go through the rest of them, and I'll post these post the second part of these notes up somewhere so you guys can get the rest just in case you want them. Like I'll post in our Google Drive or something. But the idea here is that conditional statements don't always come in this really nice if-then form. Like it'd be awesome if like your whole life things that are very complicated to understand came in super easy forms, but that's just not the case. And so when you're looking at these statements, there's so many conditional statements kind of packed into one because it's a natural way to solve this kind of puzzle. That your first job, is to really kind of tear these apart and extract all the if-then statements. Now, the contrapositive, the inverse, the converse, I think come really easy after you have the if-then statement identified. So it's really the if-then statement that's holding us back. I know in different classes I did different ones. I know for a fact I did number one quite a bit. I know I did number three quite a bit. So I'm going to pick one that I didn't do. I'm just going to go with number two. I'm going to do that live now. But again, I'm going to post these notes, or at least the second part of these notes, in our Google Drive. So if you want them, they're there for your perusal, if you will. I don't know if that's a word. I made it up. And also, just in case you want like a key. So just like normal, it's just treat it like a key, okay? So when you look at a statement like this, Henry Herbert and Mr. Lenz do not wear bifocal glasses or regular glasses. Here's where your English skills will actually um, come into play. Like someone mentioned, actually they were complaining the other day that we spend a lot of time doing stuff that you think you should do in English. That's actually a good thing because math is not an isolated subject. No subject's isolated. Einstein and Michio Kaku proved that with line theory. Um, but all these subjects are actually interconnected, so it's natural that we should, in math class, use some English skills. It's a good thing. It fires more than one part of your brain. It trains it to think very critically. Embrace it. So the way to kind of think about this is to think about, at least initially, think about the subject of a sentence, and then like the target of that subject. So I'm sure I'm using the wrong terminology. Mrs. West, my ninth grade English teacher, will totally roll her eyes at me if she heard me say that. But here's kind of what I mean. So we have Henry, Herbert, and Mr. Lenz. That forms like the subject of our sentence. Like those are the guys who are actually doing the action, and then the rest of it becomes like the target of that subject. So they do not wear bifocals or regular glasses. So at a very superficial level, that's going to give us at least one if then. So if Henry, Herbert, and Mr. Lenz are here, and here's where we have to kind of like substitute some language. So, but if Henry Herbert and Mr. Lenz aren't the ones in front of you, if they aren't present, if they aren't here, then why in the world are we talking about them wearing bifocals or glasses? It wouldn't make any sense. So the subject of our sentence becomes our hypothesis. Okay, so the second part is a condition. So then they do not wear bifocals or regular glasses. I'm going to abbreviate there at the end so I don't have to drop another line. But again, you're seeing like the second part of the action that the subjects are taking, that becomes a then. And that, like I said, is a superficial way to look at it, but at least it will get you rolling. So if subject, then target. So that's one of many you can write. There's actually some more, and here's where again, there's no magic bullet here, guys. I wish I could tell you like there's a definite technique to this. There's not. You just have to develop like your critical thinking skills. But the more of this type of work you do, the easier it gets to pick out. But there are some other conditions that exist, and I'll try to do my best to outline them. This is a different color. So here's another one that we can pick out. We have this Henry and Herbert, and we have Mr. Lenz mentioned in the same part of the sentence. But those two subjects aren't compatible. Henry and Herbert are first names. Lenz is a last name. So looking for incompatibilities is another way to pick out conditions. So one could totally say if the guys, that's guys, whoa, guys, G-U-Y-S. Okay, if the guys are Henry and Herbert, So one could totally claim that if the guys are Henry or Herbert, then they can't be Mr. Lenz. So again, we have this incompatibility of first name and last name. And again, incompatibilities are another way to look for conditional statements. So we actually set up a partially positive, partially negative conditional statement. So if Henry and Herbert are in front of us, they can't be Mr. Lenz because Henry, Herbert, and Mr. Lenz will all mentioned together. So you have to have different names. So that's two conditional statements we can totally name. There's a third one, at least a combination of a third one, where we can take the original statement and break it up into smaller substatements. So what I mean is this. So if the guy is Harry, or Henry, then he does not wear bifocals or regular glasses. And so this is another technique for extracting if-then statements, which is take a really complicated statement like the first one we made and break it up into even simpler components. So like that's like almost like Inception because that's what we did with the original non-if-then statement. We're starting to break it up into smaller if-then statements to make it easier. So it totally stands to reason you could do that again and take this very complicated if-then statement we wrote initially and then break it up. And so this could actually happen two more times. I don't have room for two more times, so I'm just gonna do one more. So I could say like if the guy is Mr. Lenz, there it is again, Guri. Huh. If the guy is Mr. Lenz, then he does not wear bifocals or regular glasses. And if you do it one more time for like if the guy is Herbert, then he does not wear bifocals or regular glasses. So this skill is actually super essential. I know you're not seeing why yet. Like I'm just having you practice some things kind of isolation, but the ability to take like a complex statement and break down all the individual conditions into smaller, easier to define packages is something that we'll totally be using all year. So like I said, I'm gonna go ahead and finish these. Not on the video, but I'll go ahead and post them into our Google Drive next to this document as a key. But that's something you can do for every single one of these. So this is what I mean by they're densely packed. And for each one of these, you can extract like 2 to 5 other conditional statements. It's a skill you guys really need to have, if not just for geometry, but for life. Like to take a complex thing and break it down into smaller, non-complex components is just mathematics. So go ahead and drop down now, or if you want to go get the key, go and get the key. Check this out. The key, I'll be honest, probably won't be posted until sometime Saturday night, because I'll need some time to work on it and then upload it to our drive. But at some point, please make sure that if you want bonus points, go ahead and write your summary using the summary process below. Whoa, something got cut off. But the summary process is highlight 3 words or phrases that you know are going to be essential to answer the essential question. And the second part is to write 2 to 3 sentences using the highlighted words or phrases. Okay. Then if you take that, your summary, and then post it back as a reply to this video in Edmodo, I will give you bonus points on your upcoming like unit test. You can totally choose to take that bonus point, say like on your next quiz, but tests are worth more. I always suggest that you save it up for that. Okay, so please do that. It'll help you by writing and having to think about stuff. It'll help your schoolmates, help your classmates because they can totally read what you have wrote. So if they miss something, maybe you can help them out. And that's what this process is about, is really just helping each other, okay? So thank you for taking these notes. I know it's not the easiest thing in the world to do. Thank you. Have a great day. Have a great weekend. I'll see you later.